How can credit unions rise above cheesy buzzwords? What ambitious initiatives can small credit unions take right now to level up and prove that asset size isn't a limitation? Are we giving grace to underperforming credit union leaders just because they have lots of experience? We tackle these questions and more on today's episode. Welcome to Grow Your Credit Union, the podcast where credit union leaders gather, learn, and grow. I am your host, Joshua Barkley, and I am with the Talk of Texas. I'm talking about my co-host, Becky Reed. Becky, what's up?
Howdy, y'all.
Becky, I've always wanted to ask you because I doubt that when you were in high school, you said to yourself, I want to be a credit union leader. So I'm wondering, take us back to senior year of high school, Becky. What did you actually want to be?
I loved horses. And so anything that I could do around horses would have been something I wanted to pursue. Being a jockey was a dream of mine at one point. And I had horses and we had lots of animals. You know, I grew up in the country. I've talked about that before, riding my horse right to Dairy Queen. But actually, when I was a senior, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Who does know what they want to do? But when I started enrolling in college, I decided to major in communications because, and you're going to laugh, you're really going to laugh, I wanted to be a news anchor.
Well, this could be the breath of fresh air that you've been waiting for here on the show, Becky. Let's jump in to today's show. We have an awesome guest. Today, we welcome the president and CEO of Connects Federal Credit Union, James McBride. James, welcome to Grow Your Credit Union.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. When I was in high school, by the way, I wanted to be a physician. I really wanted to help people who were less fortunate than me. In a lot of ways, I'm getting to live that out with what I'm doing today.
All right, employee experience. We all talk about it. We all know it's important. But according to Concentric's 2023 study, only 51% of employees feel their organization is delivering on the promised experience in terms of care, compassion, and connection. James, the term employee experience often becomes just a buzzword. It's kind of like getting a $20 Chipotle gift card on an employee's birthday. You emphasize creating special employee experiences within your credit union. So I have to ask you, can you please elaborate on exactly what you mean by special employee experiences? When
I hear the word special, and I've used that, one of the things that I think about is what are we actually doing for the people who we work for? And so it starts, I think, with the approach, right? When I approach my job, I truly believe that whether I've got 20 people on my team or 20,000 people on my team, I work for them so that I can get them engaged in working for our consumer. And in a credit union space specifically, that's our membership and our community, right? So when I start thinking about that, here's a novel idea. If you go down the street and say to business A, B, or C, hey, I'd like to do business with you. What would it take for me to get more of your business? Usually, they'll tell you. So when you start thinking about how to create special employee experiences for your employees, the first place to start is by asking them. Right. So I think about a credit union I walked into about 3 years ago. One of the first things I heard was, oh, my gosh, the benefits are here are horrible. We cannot even go to the doctor. We feel like we're going to, go upside down on our monthly finances if we even go to see somebody about a cold. OK, well, let's work on fixing that. So how do we do that? You create benefits, lifestyle accounts that will actually allow them some money that they can use to go out and live their life, buy groceries. If they need to go to the doctor, go to the doctor. You hear about what's going on in their lives. In the credit union world, there's usually a lot of young parents. Well, are they getting to go to that soccer game? Are they getting to go to that youth basketball game? That's going to create a unique and special experience for them. I had an employee who made a major accomplishment in her career. And so what did we do? We called her husband and said, hey, why don't you come down to the credit union? We're going to give her a half a day off. We don't want her to know about it. We're going to send you guys out to dinner and to a show. And we really want her to feel like she's been loved. And so it's things like that having the cars washed. It's one of the things that we did. Summertime now, so we have people come out and wash the employees' cars while they're at work. It just makes people feel loved, right? What's going on in the economy? Okay, so the economy is struggling. Okay, so great. So how can we make it possible for somebody to live their life differently? Maybe we can change their work hours. Maybe we can be responsive to what's happening in their life.
How do you keep track of all these things? Because what you're talking about is very personal. You're talking about keeping tabs on each individual to really understand them at the individual personal level. So how are you keeping tabs on all these employees so you do have that intimacy and you don't lose that personalization as more employees come into your organization?
I think it really starts with culture. And it's become kind of a flimsy word. But what I mean by that is, are we creating the right atmosphere in the workplace that we have? And use the word care. How do you care for employees? It's creating that hug feeling. We want the employees to feel like they're being hugged by their employer, that they're part of a kind of an extended group of people that really care for each other, right? And so it starts with on that one-on-one basis. And as the employee base expands, if the leaders at the top of the organization are feeling that hug type experience from their direct leader, and that person is engaged in what's going on in their life, that becomes part of who we are. It gets into the DNA of the credit union, and then it just bleeds down, right? So if you've got the right people in the organization that believe the same things, that believe in caring for people, then we're going to start seeing that happen regardless of the size of the organization, right? It doesn't have to be that I know everything about every employee on our team, so long as somebody's driving that ship.
Okay, I am going to ask you, Becky. Everybody likes you. So tell me, how were you delivering a great employee experience?
Authenticity. I think that it is really important to be who you are and convey that in your interactions with people. And while I don't agree, Joshua, that 99.9% of people probably like me, because I made a comment actually to James one time. What was that comment, James, that stuck with you?
Becky, you told me that you're not for everyone.
Right. I'm not for everyone, but I am who I am. And if I'm not the kind of person that you prefer to interact with, then that's okay with me. I don't take it personally, and that's all right. But I think being authentic, walking the talk, actually doing what you say you're going to do is something that creates that relationship moving forward. So regardless of if you're talking to a service provider, you're talking to an employee, you're talking to a colleague, you're talking to a peer, you're talking to a direct report, as long as you are communicating in a way that they know it's coming from your heart, I think that makes a big difference in creating relationships with people.
If I can add to that, so Becky and I are aligned a lot there. I was walking down the hallway just 2 weeks ago. So I've only been with this credit union for a few months. And I saw an employee in the hallway and she was kind of frustrated. I said, "What's going on?" She says, "My computer won't work and I'm having trouble with it." So I walked in and started asking questions. And her experience was really deteriorating because her technology wouldn't work. So to Becky's point, you add action. Let's fix that. Let's get that corrected. And oh, by the way, it looks like you've got a rip in your chair here. Why don't you go ahead and go pick out a new chair so that you have the place to sit and feel like your organization actually cares for you. And so when I talk about giving somebody a hug, that's as close as it gets without actually giving a hug, right? I'm going to help you get your computer fixed so your employee experience goes up a little bit. And by the way, I want you to be comfortable too, right? And that's just a passing conversation walking down the hallway. But if that happens over and over again, because that's who I am, to Becky's point, if that's authentically who I am, then that's going to bleed through the organization. If we have the right people on the board, we're going to have a lot of special experiences.
The story of the small credit unions. We hear about it all the time in the publications. They talk about the death of small credit unions. Will small credit unions survive? Let's start by talking about the doubts that small credit unions have. James, you and I were having a conversation, and you were at a small credit union roundtable, and you told me that you noted hearing the words, "I can't," 23 times. Now, at your credit union, you're known for pushing transformative agendas and getting things done. So in your experience, what is holding small credit unions back, and how can we get more small credit unions into the I can mindset?
That's a great question. And it's something that I've been championing for a long time now. As soon as I became a CEO, it was one of the first things I did. That moment that you described was literally my first day on the job. And I'm with my peers at a conference and I'm hearing this word, I can't. And I'm thinking, oh gosh, frankly, I'm going, what did I get myself into? What's going on around here? But the reality is it's all about mindset, right? So the small credit union space, frankly, has a lot of flexibility to it. There's a lot of opportunity for small credit union leaders to make changes and do things. There's a whole lot less red tape and a lot more opportunity if you're willing to step out and say, I believe in something, I'm going to champion it, and I'm going to do it. And what happens is a lot of times what I've seen from my peers is they get so caught up in the mindset. We don't have enough capital. We're not earning enough money. We can't figure out how to get more members. And so they stay the same in perpetuity, and they're wondering why their business doesn't improve. And the answer is because they're not investing in it. To change that I can't to I can, first, you've got to believe in yourself. Yes, we're going to go and we're going to be successful. We're going to surround ourselves with people and partners that are going to make us much better at what we do. And then you've got to get people moving in the same direction. But you've also got to believe that you've got the right strategy in place, that you've got the right network in place, the right solutions in place. And if you don't have them today, how are you going to get them tomorrow so that you can put yourself in a position to be competitive in the market?
Now, James, you mentioned that small credit unions can be more versatile, more nimble. Can you give some examples of what you mean specifically by that?
Yeah. So sometimes it's about the number of people that are decision makers in the room, right? So let's just start there. So we want to launch a new initiative, a new product, a new solution. You go to a much larger organization, sometimes it's got to go through 5 or 6 different committees before you can make a decision and before you can say, hey, we're going to try to do something. And then, by the way, if it doesn't show profit in the first 30 days, we're going to throw it out the door, right? That happens in the business world. In small credit unions, what we can do is we can say, hey, there's 4 or 5 people in the room and we kind of think this is a good idea. Let's try it. Now, where we mess up so many times is we run headlong into something without really thinking through what we need to do. And so that makes us feel disabled again. But again, if you say, this is what we're doing, this is where we're going, and then you're strategic in it, what makes us nimble is the ability to go do it, not our inability to execute. The lack of execution is driven solely by the people that are making things happen or not happen. And that's the truth. So when you think about, okay, how do we become more nimble? The answer is, what do you want to get into? What's different? What's new? What's out there in the marketplace? What's coming into the marketplace that you're just hearing about? Do you want to get into it? And you don't have to go through, like I said, 6 iterations of conversation to figure out if we can do it or not. Just go do it and try it. And I believe in this. I don't like the word fail. I can't stand that word. I try not to use it. But there's this buzz phrase, fail fast, right? Get into something. See if it works. Is it moving the needle? It doesn't necessarily have to show 6x profit, but is it moving the needle? Are you starting to connect with this new novel community? But again, being nimble doesn't mean being silly, right? You've got to know what you're doing, strategize, and move with discretion, but also confidence in the solution.
Becky Reed knows a thing or two about growing small credit unions. So, Becky, what's your take?
Well, what James talked about a little bit was creating a culture of innovation, right? And I think that regardless of your size, that is a challenge in credit union land because of the fact we're so highly regulated. And so we get told by our regulators a lot that we can't or we shouldn't. We get told by other people in the organization that we can't or we shouldn't. And that C word can mean a lot of things. It can mean I don't want to. It can mean I don't know how. It can mean I'm scared. There's a lot of things that can mean. But when you actually have a culture of innovation, which at a smaller organization is certainly easier to implement than it is at a larger organization, it just takes a shorter amount of time, really, is why I say easier to implement. But being innovative is applying the scientific method to an idea, right? So you come together, you create a hypothesis, you execute on that hypothesis by testing it, then you come back and validate whether or not your hypothesis is true. If it's not true, then you go back to the drawing board, create a new hypothesis based on the information that you've gathered from testing, and you move forward. It's a very iterative process. But James just talked about not liking that word fail. Well, a key to innovation is actually failure. You try something that doesn't work. And so creating that culture of innovation is something that a smaller credit union can get to much quicker.
Yeah, what I'll say on the word fail, the reason why I don't like it is because of the negative connotation that comes with it. We wouldn't have any of the technology and the solutions and the advancements that we've had over time in our history worldwide, not even just in this country, obviously, without people repeatedly failing. Thomas Edison's one of my favorite inventors, and he went through thousands and thousands and thousands of failures to get to where he wanted to go. So it's not the word specifically, it's the connotation that comes with it that irritates me.
In the world of credit unions, there is a tendency to retain leadership despite underperformance. And I'm saying that because I've just listened around the water cooler on this one. And I have to ask you, do you believe that credit unions value years of experience more highly than actual performance competency when it comes to leadership roles?
Well, I love getting controversial questions, right? Because I'm going to give a controversial answer. However, our listeners will all be nodding their head. I'm going to speak in generalities. So, of course, there are certainly outliers in the industry where this is not the case. But when you talk, Joshua, about leadership, I'm going to apply that not only to credit union executives or somebody in the C-suite. What I am also going to apply it to is board members. And I think that there is a tendency in the industry to equate longevity with stability, which it certainly can equate to that. It can also equate to stagnancy, right? So stability equals being stagnant in some cases. And actually, James mentioned this a little bit earlier. You're not changing anything. So you're doing things the same way that you've always done them. And there are many, many boards in credit union land who do not have term limits. And I have been fortunate enough to work at a credit union that had term limits and one that did not. And also another thing about a board is the board in many cases gets a little bit complacent. They get comfortable with the CEO. They know everything about the CEO. And when they see that things need to change, they just expect the CEO, or maybe they don't, to make those changes. And there's a comfortableness about our industry and a way that we can get complacent, because if we're doing everything, we're kind of that tortoise and the hare, right? We're slow and steady wins the race. And the credit union's been doing this for 30 years, and we should be able to do this for the next 30 years. I think that changing things up certainly can be disruptive to a credit union. So I'm going to specifically talk about boards for a minute, then I'm going to let James kind of take a crack at this. But in board succession planning, let's talk about term limits for a minute, because one of the concerns on the board, in any board for that matter, is that you lose that tenure. You lose that experience when somebody rolls off the board. So that's why you stagger it, right? And that's why maybe you have somebody not able to serve more than 4 consecutive terms. And by the time they get to their 3rd term, perhaps, maybe now they're in a leadership role. They're on the executive committee of the board, and they're helping to mentor and grow oncoming new board members. And so there has to be a plan. And this is true with leadership in a credit union from an executive level too. There has to be a plan. But yes, it is a systemic problem in our industry, and it is something through succession planning that we should be addressing.
Becky, I know obviously that as a leader, there are going to be performance metrics that you're measured by. Does the board have similar metrics that they're measured by, or are they just kind of lounging like a weekend at Uncle Bernie's type of scenario?
Well, it's funny because there is the whole gamut of a board governance out there. There are plenty of board, and it really doesn't matter on the size of the credit union. I'm going to be honest. You can have a really small credit union that some might consider unsophisticated that has a really fantastic board governance model where the board is evaluating each other and they are taking a look at the needs of the board when they're fulfilling a vacancy. There are large credit unions out there that have zero board governance where no, they are not taking a look at each other's performance. They are not taking a look at what skill sets are going to benefit the credit union. And those are things that happen at a lot of other nonprofit organizations. I serve on boards of a lot of different organizations, and board governance is something that is key. And so you're going to kind of find, Josh, it's all over the place.
James, let's pass the mic over to you. What are your thoughts?
Well, the first thing I would say is you could do an entire series on this question, talking about leadership in the credit union movement, the nuances of it. I really think I'll stick with board for a moment, and then I'll go back to the actual employee base as well. On the board side, one of the things that I think is something that is not being said yet in this particular conversation, sometimes credit unions have a hard time finding board members, right? So there's not always this active role from the membership to be involved in the running of their organization. Sometimes they like the, I get to be a part of the ownership of this financial enterprise, but the work's for someone else to do, right? And a lot of that has to do with, well, maybe we're not really sure what a credit union is. Something that maybe my mom and my dad or my teacher or my employer told me, hey, go down and open an account at the credit union. And I don't see it that different than my bank. I don't really understand the differences. So some people just don't understand why. And that shows up also in market share and all those things. So again, we could talk about it for hours.
So James, really quick, I want to double click on what you said about how some board, it seems like you're saying that there are some credit unions that are not prioritizing board members or having trouble getting board members. That doesn't seem like that should be a difficult thing. I see board members at the conferences all the time stealing socks off of vendor tables. So why is it that they would have trouble staffing a board?
I think it goes back to not-for-profit, right? So it's not like getting a board member of a Fortune 500 company. This is volunteer work. Most of these people, they might get a conference or two, and the people that are stealing the things from the vendor tables are probably taking it back to their grandchildren or maybe to their classroom or whatever the case is. This is kind of a vacation in some ways for them. They may not show up to all the sessions. They're not educating because they see it as their benefit. This is the benefit that I get for being part of this board, right? So then when you talk about being comfortable, oh gosh, we're comfortable with the CEO. We're comfortable with where we are. The credit union's not losing money. We're plodding along. So we got our blinders on and we're going to keep going forward and we're not going to push for innovation. And the reason why is because it's easier, right? So it's volunteer work. So when you have board members that come in a couple hours a month to be engaged in the credit union, it's very difficult to get really under the balance sheet and really see what's going on in depth. And then we fall prone to, this is cliche now, the blockbuster mentality, right? So we're going to have our blinders on. We're not going to be worried about what's coming on in the future. And that then turns back over to the credit union leadership, right? So when you get back over on the credit union leadership side, well, gosh, I'm going to get through the year. And so many credit union leaders, no one's going to like me to say this, I don't think out loud, but here it is. There's so many credit union leaders in this industry. They're just trying not to get fired. They're not worried about making their credit union better. They're worried about not being fired. And if we can't change that mentality of we're going to create better market share, better product, better service, better solution to the community, then I would argue, what are we doing anyway? And the answer is not much.
Let's say your board you feel is underperforming. What actions can you take to try to correct that? Or are there no actions you can take?
Oh man, that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. I've actually had some of those conversations, right? Where, I've had a board member that maybe didn't understand something we were doing. Maybe they weren't engaged in something. Maybe they missed 2 meetings and they want to jump into the third meeting and tell us why our ideas are wrong, right? So you really, for a CEO, it's a lot of sidebar conversation, right? You pull that board member aside and say, hey, tell me what's really going on here. What are you really thinking about? How do we move forward together? I think that's the key, is the CEO's job is to get the board to see the vision so that we can move forward together, right? in continuity with whoever the leader is on the boards. Usually it's the chairman, right? But sometimes it's not, right? So who is the actual leader on this board? That's the person that I need to be making sure that I'm in alignment with right up front so that we can be in partnership. Now, I think it's important to know, though, the board is not the employee base, right? So those are two totally different entities. So you got to treat them different. But pulling people aside and saying that, but also having training, board training, that's something a lot of credit unions, in my experience, don't really invest in, but legitimate board governance training on some type of regular basis, especially if you have turnover, so people understand what being a member of the board of directors of their credit union actually means. And then they can either choose to dive into that or choose to dive out of it based off of the answer to that question.
This is something nobody talks about, but as the CEO, so when you look at an org chart for a credit union, the board is at the top, right? The membership votes for the board and the CEO reports directly to the board. So all CEOs have a 5 or 7 or however large their board is. That's how many bosses they have. And when you have an underperforming board, so I have seen this happen where you have lack of attendance. People don't show up for board meetings. I have seen board members not even read their board packet. They don't know what's happening. They don't ask questions. They're not engaged. I have also seen activist boards that try to push a specific agenda that benefits them, which is something that happens on other types of boards that are not credit unions. So some people promote their business and they expect to get business and get referrals by being part of the board. That's not something that happens on a credit union board. And so it is really, really hard. Probably one of the most difficult things a CEO has to do at a credit union is manage the board. It requires a lot of diplomacy. And frankly, if you don't have a board that is engaged, or if you have a board that is too engaged, it can make the job of being a CEO almost impossible.
I feel like there was a mic drop and perhaps an old-timey bomb with a wick just exploded as well. That brings us to the end of the show. James, I want to give you an opportunity to plug anything that you'd like to plug, and then I would like you to tell the audience how they can get in touch with you.
The easiest way to get in touch with me is LinkedIn. I post on LinkedIn pretty much just about every day, Monday through Friday. The whole idea behind my post are try to get people engaged with thinking and being motivated for their day to move forward. Connects Federal Credit Union. We serve a community here in the Richmond area, but the credit union movement in totality is what I'm really engaged in. How do we move our entire movement forward? And so one of the things that I got connected with Becky on, frankly, is how do we transition from the analog world that we live in today and to move to more of a digital world for credit unions. So I would tell people to be on the lookout for things that might be coming down the road in the future relative to that in all shapes and forms. If you want to find out what's happening with that, just follow Becky. She'll tell you. But the reality is, that's what I would tell people is be forward thinking, right? Just be forward thinking about what you're doing and where you're going, and putting out products, solutions, and services that don't just serve the 3 people that are in your credit union today, but the thousands of people that are out there in the community that you could serve tomorrow.
Becky, I'm going to ask you the same thing. How can people get a hold of you, and what are you plugging?
Well, at LinkedIn, I am, of course, a very prevalent on LinkedIn. I'm on there all the time. You can also follow me on Twitter or X, Trekkie Becky. And I'm posting about all kinds of technology. I mean, anything that interests me. I went to a conference, actually. I was speaking at a conference, and it was a NASCIS and America's Credit Union conference, and it was focusing on cybersecurity. And one of the speakers was talking about quantum computing, and that absolutely fascinates me. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll probably see a couple posts about quantum.
Excellent. James McBride, I want to thank you for coming on the show. And I also want to thank our listeners. If you like hearing from credit union leaders and getting insights like you got today, then please subscribe to the show and please let other people know about it. And also, if you want to be a guest or you want to be a sponsor, you can head over to growyourcreditunion.com we'll walk you through it on the website. So please let people know about the show, and we will talk to you next time. Take care, and bye-bye.